He had the perfect life, the perfect job, and the perfect fiancée, a woman he called a real catch. To build her up, he had to tear his ex-wife down, painting her as a mousy, unambitious woman he'd thankfully outgrown. His friends believed him. His fiancée adored him, and his world was secure. But a single sun-drenched afternoon changed everything. One glimpse of his forgotten ex-wife standing on the deck of a billionaire's super yacht didn't just shatter his narrative, it exposed a lie so profound it threatened to destroy the perfect world he'd so carefully constructed. Ethan Vanderbilt moved through the world with the practiced ease of a man who believed in his own marketing. At 36, he was a senior vice president at a boutique investment firm, a position that sounded more impressive than it was, but afforded him a life of tailored suits, overpriced cocktails, and a carefully curated circle of acquaintances who reflected his own perceived success. He wasn't owed money, a fact that gnawed at him in quiet moments, but he had mastered the art of appearing as if he were. His charisma was a weapon, his smile a shield, and his new fiancée, Olivia Davies, was the crown jewel of his collection. Olivia was by all accounts flawless. She was 10 years younger, with a cascade of blonde hair that seemed to catch the light just so, and a laugh that tinkled like wind chimes. Her family, the Davies of Connecticut, had the kind of quiet, unstated wealth that Ethan craved. They had a summer home, not a beach house, and spoke of Europe in seasons, not cities. Olivia herself was sweet, perpetually agreeable, and looked at Ethan with a wide-eyed adoration that fed his ego like oxygen to a fire. To his friends, he described her as the total package, a real catch. It was a line he repeated often at dinner parties on the golf course and in the hushed, smoky corners of exclusive bars. But to truly appreciate the masterpiece that was Olivia, Ethan felt it was necessary to display the rough, discarded canvas of his past. That canvas was his ex-wife, Elara Walsh. In the 5 years since their divorce, Ethan had meticulously rewritten the history of their decade-long marriage. He painted a portrait of a woman who was sweet but simple, supportive but stagnant. Elara was comfortable. He'd tell his friends Liam Kennedy and Noah Sinclair over a game of squash. He'd pause, letting the word hang in the air, imbuing it with the weight of mediocrity. She was my starter wife. You know, the one you have when you're still figuring things out. She was content with our little rented apartment, her little admin job. She had no drive, no ambition well beyond me. Liam, a sturdy, good-natured architect who had known Ethan since college, would nod along, though a flicker of unease sometimes crossed his face. He remembered Elara differently. He remembered her quick wit, her fierce loyalty, the way she could gently deflate Ethan's ego with a single, well-placed joke. But Ethan was his friend, and loyalty was Liam's defining trait. Noah, on the other hand, was a journalist with a practiced cynicism. He'd watch Ethan perform his monologue, his eyes sharp and analytical. He found Ethan's constant need for validation tiresome. "What's she up to now?" Noah had asked once, a few years back. Ethan had shrugged, a perfect pantomime of detached benevolence. "Honestly, I have no idea. I made sure she was taken care of course." He'd lied. The divorce had been anything but generous. He had leveraged his financial acumen and Elara's emotional exhaustion to leave her with next to nothing. But we were just on different tracks. I was accelerating and she was parked. I hope she's happy, I really do. Probably still at that same desk making copies. This was the narrative he cemented, not just for his friends, but for Olivia. He needed her to understand the journey he had undertaken, the dead weight he had been forced to shed in order to become the man she deserved. I couldn't grow with her, he told Olivia one night, his voice a low, intimate murmur, as they lay in the bed of their gleaming minimalist apartment overlooking the city. It was like she was an anchor. I'd talk about wanting to take risks, to build something, and she'd just get this look on her face, fear. She was afraid of success. You thrive on it. You push me. You get it. Olivia, wrapped in his arms, felt a surge of pride. She was the one who got him. She was the dynamic, forward-moving partner he required. She had never met Alara, but the image Ethan painted was vivid, a mousy, timid woman in a beige cardigan, forever looking backward, while Ethan strode gallantly into the future. It was a sad story, and it made her love him all the more for having overcome it. The divorce itself had been a quiet affair, finalized on a grey Tuesday. Alara had been pale and silent, signing the papers with a hand that trembled slightly. Ethan had interpreted her silence as acquiescence, her weariness as defeat. He had taken the apartment, the savings, the momentum. He had left her with a few boxes of personal effects and a palpable sense of relief. He was free. He was ascending. He never looked back, because in his mind there was nothing there worth seeing. He was Ethan Vanderbilt, and his kingdom, built on the ghost of a forgotten marriage, was finally perfect. Ethan's campaign to establish Olivia as the ultimate human achievement was relentless and pervasive. It wasn't enough for his friends to simply meet her. They had to understand her significance, her value, her superiority in the grand narrative of his life. He wasn't just in love. He was a connoisseur who had acquired a priceless work of art, and he insisted on giving everyone a guided tour. The primary exhibition hall for this tour was the new apartment he and Olivia shared. It was a space that screamed new money, with stark white walls, a sprawling modular sofa, and a kitchen island the size of a small car. They hosted a dinner party, a housewarming of sorts. Liam and his wife Chloe came, as did Noah, who arrived stag and armed with a bottle of wine that was just expensive enough to be polite. Ethan was in his element, a conductor orchestrating the evening. "Liv, honey, tell them about the Nantucket fundraiser," he prompted, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. Olivia blushed prettily. "Oh, it was nothing, really. My mother ropes me into these things. We were just trying to raise some money for the children's literacy program." "Nothing," Ethan boomed, laughing, as if she'd told the most charmingly self-deprecating joke. "She raised over $200,000 in one night. The woman's a force of nature. She just has this grace. People want to be around her. It's a world away from what I was used to." He didn't say Alara's name, but he didn't have to. The ghost was always present, a convenient shadow that made Olivia's light seem all the brighter. Later, while Olivia was showing Chloe the apartment's walk-in closet, Ethan leaned in conspiratorially toward Liam and Noah. "See what I mean, class? It's effortless. Her family has a table at every important event. The connections are unbelievable. It's a different stratosphere. Remember those potlucks Alara used to host with what was it? The 7-layer dip?" Liam shifted uncomfortably. He remembered those potlucks. He remembered laughing so hard with Alara over a burned batch of brownies that he'd gotten tears in his eyes. He remembered the warmth and the lack of pretense, a stark contrast to the current sterile environment where he was afraid to set his glass down without a coaster. "They were fun, Ethan," he said mildly. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "Fun for what they were. But this is the big leagues. Olivia understands the importance of image, of building a network. Alara just wanted to nest." The word was delivered like an epithet. Noah took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the way Olivia, upon rejoining them, glanced at Ethan for approval. He saw the subtle tension in her shoulders when Ethan launched into another story that began with, "I never could have done this before." He wondered if she ever got tired of being a walking, talking testament to her fiancé's upgrade. The campaign continued on the golf course a few weeks later. It was a Saturday, crisp and sunny. As they walked the fairway, Ethan was on a roll, complaining about a deal at work before seamlessly pivoting. "Thank God I have Liv to come home to. She just gets the pressure. We can talk for hours about strategy, about ambition. She's as sharp as I am." "That's great, man," Liam said, lining up his shot. "It's everything," Ethan insisted, his voice hardening slightly. "You have no idea what it's like to be with someone who doesn't get it. Someone who looks at your ambition like it's a flaw. Everything was a negotiation. Why do you have to work late? Why do we have to go to this networking event?" It was exhausting. Noah, who had been quiet for most of the game, finally spoke. "You know, I bumped into Alara's sister the other day at the market." Ethan's posture stiffened. "Oh, yeah. Yeah. Asked how Alara was doing. She said she was good, working on some new project. Sounded happy." A flicker of something dark and unpleasant crossed Ethan's face before being replaced by his usual mask of patronizing charm. "Good for her. I mean that. I hope she's doing okay. Probably still doing that little admin thing for that dental supply company. It suited her. Low stress, you know." He then turned to Liam. "Speaking of stress, you will not believe the hoops Liv is jumping through for this wedding. Her mother wants a full-string quartet." "A quartet. But hey, whatever my queen wants, she gets. She's a real catch. The real deal, worth every string." Liam and Noah exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. It was a look that acknowledged the shared experience of listening to the Gospel of Olivia, as delivered by its most fervent and perhaps most insecure preacher. Ethan saw himself as a man who had finally arrived, who had secured the perfect partner. But to Noah, it was beginning to sound less like a man celebrating his future, and more like a man desperately trying to bury his past under an avalanche of praise. He was building a cathedral to his new life, but he never stopped checking to make sure the foundations laid over the ruins of his old one were still holding. The setting was St. Bart's, a jewel in the Caribbean. The occasion was Liam's 40th birthday, a milestone that demanded more than just a steak dinner back home. Liam, Chloe, Noah, and a few other friends had pooled their resources to charter a handsome 45-foot catamaran for a long weekend. Ethan, of course, had insisted on paying a larger share, a gesture that was less about generosity and more about asserting his status as the group's most successful member. The first day was idyllic, a perfect postcard of paradise. The turquoise water was bathtub warm, the sky an endless, cloudless blue. Champagne, personally selected by Ethan, flowed freely. Olivia was in her element, resplendent in a white bikini and oversized sunglasses, artfully composing selfies against the stunning backdrop. She laughed her tinkling laugh as Ethan regaled the group with a story about a hilarious mix-up with their reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant. A story whose sole purpose was to mention that they had been dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant. "To Liam," Ethan bellowed, raising his glass. 40 years young. He draped an arm around Olivia, pulling her close. "And to friends, old and new. I've got to say, life doesn't get much better than this." He surveyed the scene, the boat, the sea, the beautiful woman at his side, with the smug satisfaction of a king reviewing his domain. He felt invincible. It was in that precise moment of supreme self-satisfaction that it happened. Another vessel appeared on the horizon, moving with a silent, inexorable grace. To call it a boat was an insult. It was a super yacht, a floating palace of gleaming white fiberglass and tinted black glass, at least 200 feet long. It was a vision of obscene wealth, a behemoth that made their chartered catamaran feel like a child's bath toy. As it glided past, perhaps 100 yards away, the soft strains of sophisticated lounge music drifted across the water. Everyone on the catamaran fell silent, gawking. It was the kind of vessel they'd only ever seen in movies or on the Instagram feeds of celebrities. "My God," Chloe whispered, shielding her eyes. "Who even owns something like that?" Noah, ever the journalist, zoomed in with his phone camera. "Let's see if we can catch the name." But then he froze, his hand lowered slowly. "Forget the name," he said, his voice a low whistle. "You guys need to see this." On the sprawling aft deck of the super yacht, a small group of people were mingling, and standing among them, holding a champagne flute, was a woman. Her back was initially to them, but then she turned, throwing her head back in a laugh that was silent from this distance, but clearly full of genuine mirth. She was wearing a simple navy blue sundress that fluttered in the sea breeze. Her auburn hair, which Ethan remembered her always pulling back in a severe practical bun, was down-styled in loose waves that caught the afternoon sun like fire. She wasn't just pretty, she was radiant luminous. She possessed an aura of unshakable confidence, a relaxed power that was more arresting than any conventional beauty. It was Alara Walsh. A man beside her, tall and elegantly dressed in linen trousers and a crisp shirt, placed a familiar proprietary arm around her waist. He leaned in and murmured something in her ear, and she smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. The man was Sebastian Thorne. Not just a rich man, but the rich man. A reclusive, almost mythical figure in the tech world who had revolutionized data security and was reportedly worth billions. He wasn't some paunchy old money inheritor. He was a contemporary titan, sharp and respected. On the catamaran, the party was over. The champagne in their glasses might as well have been vinegar. Liam's jaw was literally hanging open. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Noah just stared, a slow, disbelieving grin spreading across his face. He lowered his phone and looked directly at Ethan. But it was Olivia's reaction that was the most telling. Her perfect smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure confusion. Her eyes darted from the impossible vision on the yacht to the face of her fiancé. Ethan stood as if he'd been turned to stone. The blood drained from his face, leaving his sun-kissed tan looking sallow and sick. His mind, usually so quick with a boast or a dismissal, was a blank, short-circuiting mess. He saw the woman. He saw the man. He saw the yacht and the carefully constructed kingdom he had built in his mind, with its narratives of superiority and its ghosts of mediocrity, was hit by a tidal wave. This wasn't the mousy, unambitious starter wife in a beige cardigan. This wasn't the woman who was afraid of success, who was content making copies at a dental supply company. This was a different person entirely. Or worse, this was the person she had been all along, and he had simply been too blind, too arrogant, too self-absorbed to see it. The silence on the boat was absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves. On the super yacht, Alara, blissfully unaware of her audience, turned with Sebastian Thorne and disappeared through a sliding glass door into the yacht's cool, impossibly luxurious interior. leaving a boatload of stunned spectators and one utterly humiliated man in her wake. The atmosphere on the catamaran for the rest of the afternoon was thick with unspoken thoughts. The sun still shone. The sea was still a brilliant turquoise, but the celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. Ethan had retreated into a surly quiet, hiding behind his sunglasses and offering clipped one-word answers to any attempts at conversation. He nursed a single glass of champagne, his knuckles white around the stem. Olivia tried to salvage the day, attempting a light-hearted conversation with Chloe about wedding plans, but her voice lacked its usual effervescence. She kept casting worried, questioning glances at Ethan, who seemed to have erected an invisible wall around himself. She had witnessed him being smug, charming, arrogant, and passionate, but she had never before seen him look so small. The image of Alara, so poised, so radiant, so clearly at home, in a world of unimaginable luxury, had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. The story she had been told about this woman suddenly felt thin, flimsy, like a script with a gaping plot hole. That evening, they had a reservation at a high-end restaurant built into the cliffside overlooking the harbor. The view was breathtaking, but the tension from the afternoon had followed them to shore. Everyone was making a strenuous effort to be normal, discussing Liam's birthday gift and the plan for the next day, but the conversation was stilted, punctuated by silences that were just a little too long. The elephant in the room wasn't just an elephant. It was a blue-water super yacht. It was Noah, predictably, who decided to address it. He waited for a lull, then leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass with a calculated casualness. So, he began, his voice deceptively mild. "Wild seeing Alara today, huh? She seems to be doing exceptionally well for herself." Ethan, who had been pushing a piece of tuna around his plate, looked up. His eyes, when he finally met Noah's gaze, were cold with fury. "It's a flash in the pan," he snapped, his voice louder than intended, causing a nearby table to glance over. "Is it?" Noah pressed, undeterred. Sebastian Thorne doesn't exactly seem like the flash-in-the-pan type. The guy is practically a recluse. You don't see him splashing his flings all over the tabloids. "She's a gold digger." Ethan spat the venom in his voice, shocking everyone, most of all Olivia. "It's the oldest story in the book. A pretty woman finds a rich man to solve her problems. A guy like that gets bored easily. Trust me, I know her. She was never that interesting. She doesn't have the depth to keep a man like that entertained for long." The cruelty of his words hung in the air, ugly and stark. He wasn't just dismissing her success. He was actively trying to diminish her character, to paint her as manipulative and shallow. Liam, ever the peacemaker, tried to intervene. "Ethan, come on, man. Let's just drop it. We're here to celebrate." But Noah wasn't done. He wasn't being malicious. He was genuinely fascinated, a journalist pulling at a thread that was rapidly unraveling a much larger story. "I don't know, Ethan," he countered, his tone now serious. "I didn't get gold digger from that. She didn't look like she was clinging to him. She looked, powerful, happy, genuinely happy." He paused, then delivered the final blow. "She looked like she was finally in her element." The implication was clear. If that was her element, then what had her time with Ethan been? A cage? Olivia flinched as if she'd been struck. She looked at Ethan, at the ugly sneer on his face, and saw him through a new filter. She replayed his words in her head, not just from tonight, but from all the months they'd been together. She was holding me back. She was afraid of success. She was a starter wife. Had Alara been holding him back, or had he been the one suppressing her? The confidence Alara exuded on that yacht was not something a person simply acquired overnight by latching onto a billionaire. It was the confidence of someone who knew her own worth. Where had that woman been during their marriage? And why had Ethan felt the need to paint such a pathetic, demeaning portrait of her? The cracks in Ethan's perfect facade were no longer just visible. They were beginning to splinter. Olivia felt a cold dread creep into her heart. She was engaged to a man who was either a terrible judge of character or a deliberate, cruel liar. For the first time, she started to wonder if she was the real catch, or if she was just the next woman auditioning for a role in a fantasy of Ethan's own creation, a fantasy that was rapidly colliding with a stunning and undeniable reality. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries, but for Olivia and for the rest of the friends at the table, something had irrevocably broken. The weekend in St. Bart's ended not with a bang, but with a strained and hasty dispersal at the airport. The camaraderie was gone, replaced by a polite distance. Back home, the sighting of Ilara became a quiet obsession for the group, a puzzle they felt compelled to solve. The official story, as told by Ethan, had been so thoroughly debunked by that single radiant image that it created a vacuum, and they were desperate to fill it with the truth. It was Noah naturally who did the digging. As a journalist, he had access to research tools and a network of contacts that went beyond a simple Google search. He started with public records business filings and old university alumni newsletters. Liam, feeling a pang of guilt for his years of passive acceptance of Ethan's narrative, eagerly listened as Noah started to piece together the real story of Ilara Walsh's life post-divorce. What they uncovered wasn't a story of a woman who got lucky, but one of astonishing resilience and reinvention. "You're not going to believe this," Noah said to Liam over the phone a week later. "That little admin job at the dental supply company, she quit that 2 weeks after the divorce was final." According to Noah's research, Ilara had been utterly broken by the divorce. Ethan hadn't just left her, he had systematically dismantled her self-worth for years, convincing her that she was nothing without him. The divorce, where he had financially bled her dry, was the final devastating blow. For a few months, she drifted, staying with her sister, barely functioning. But then something shifted. It was a breakthrough born from hitting rock bottom. "Remember how she was always into art?" Noah asked. Ethan used to mock her for dragging him to those little indie galleries. Liam remembered. Ethan had called it Ilara's weird hobby. "Well," Noah continued, his voice filled with admiration, "she used the tiny bit of money she had left to enroll in a night course at the university. She went back to finish the degree she abandoned 20 years ago to put Ethan through his MBA program, a dual degree in art history and business administration." Ilara hadn't just finished her degree, she had excelled. She graduated with honors, focusing her final thesis on a burgeoning and widely misunderstood market, investment-grade, digital, and multimedia art. While the traditional art world was still skeptical, Ilara saw the future. She had a brilliant, intuitive eye for identifying emerging artists whose work had immense cultural and financial potential. After graduating, she started a small one-woman consultancy firm from her sister's spare bedroom. She called it Walsh Art Advisory. She wrote a blog that became a must-read for a niche group of tech-savvy art collectors. She was sharp, insightful, and her predictions on which artists were about to break out were uncannily accurate. The meeting with Sebastian Thorne was the pivotal moment, but it wasn't a chance encounter at a charity gala. Thorne, a known collector of unconventional assets, had been following her blog for months. He was deeply impressed by her intellect and her prescient analysis. He sought her out not as a potential date, but as a professional consultant. He invited her to be a keynote speaker at the exclusive Art and Algorithms Symposium he hosted annually in Geneva. That's where they met, Noah explained. She was on stage speaking to a room full of billionaires and tech moguls about the future of art curation. Thorne was in the front row. By all accounts, he was mesmerized, not by her looks, but by her brain. Their relationship began as a professional one. Thorne hired her firm to overhaul his private collection and advise on his personal art investments. He became her biggest client, and soon after her biggest champion. They discovered a shared passion not just for art, but for making it accessible. They believed technology could democratize the art world, and they began drafting a plan for a new kind of philanthropic entity. This led to the grand twist, the detail that made Ethan's gold digger theory so laughably, pathetically wrong. "She's not his girlfriend, Liam," Noah said, the revelation landing with the force of a bomb. "I mean, she is, but that's not the headline." About 6 months ago, they officially launched a joint venture. It's called the Thorne-Walsh Foundation. It's a massive multi-billion-dollar philanthropic and art investment fund. And get this, Sebastian Thorne is the chairman, but Alara Walsh is the chief executive officer, the CEO. The superyacht wasn't just a pleasure craft. It was a floating headquarters, a mobile gallery they were using to host international artists, museum curators, and investors as they sailed through the Caribbean, building partnerships for the Foundation's first global initiative. Alara Walsh hadn't just fallen into a billionaire's arms. She had built her own empire, brick by painful brick. She had taken the ashes of the life Ethan had torched and created something magnificent from them. She wasn't arm candy. She was a partner, a visionary, a CEO, a powerhouse who had found a man not to save her, but one whose power and vision were a match for her own. The woman on the yacht hadn't just been happy, she had been home. The truth about Alara, the CEO, the visionary, the co-founder of the Thorne-Walsh Foundation, spread through their social circle like a quiet, devastating seismic wave. It didn't just create cracks in Ethan's reputation, it triggered a full-scale demolition. Noah, feeling a certain grim satisfaction in revealing a truth so thoroughly concealed, made sure the key details reached not just Liam, but Chloe and the others from the St. Bart's trip. The information didn't just recontextualize Alara. It completely reframed their perception of Ethan. His years of condescending remarks, his dismissive hand waves, his pitying little anecdotes, they all now seemed like the desperate, pathetic actions of a man terrified by the potential of the woman he claimed to have outgrown. The most powerful aftershock, however, was building within the walls of Ethan's own home. Olivia had been a ghost since their return from the Caribbean, her usual adoration replaced by a cool, observational watchfulness that he found deeply unsettling. She was no longer his adoring audience. She was a detective, and he was her prime suspect. Late at night, after he was asleep, she would sit in the cold blue light of her tablet, tracing the digital breadcrumbs of Alara's past. She found the university's online archive and downloaded a copy of the thesis Alara had submitted, The Algorithmic Eye, Valuating and Curating Art in the Digital Age. As she read, a feeling of profound, sickening horror washed over her. The writing was brilliant, dense, prescient, and argued with a fierce intelligence. Alara had not only predicted the rise of blockchain-verified art 5 years before it became mainstream, but she had also built a compelling ethical framework for its curation. This was not the work of a mousy, unambitious woman. This was the work of a genius. Olivia's fingers trembled as she scrolled through page after page of incisive analysis, each sentence a fresh indictment of Ethan's lies. She felt a wave of nausea as she contrasted the powerful voice on the page with Ethan's sneering dismissal. She was sweet but simple. She had no drive. The final pieces of her disillusionment clicked into place. The confrontation, when it came, was not born of anger, but of a cold, hard certainty. She waited for him in the living room, the tablet resting on the coffee table between them like a piece of evidence. "I spoke to Chloe today," she began, her voice devoid of emotion. "She forwarded me an article about the Thorne-Walsh Foundation." She tapped the screen, and Alara's smiling professional headshot appeared next to Sebastian Thorne's. "It turns out your starter wife, the one you felt so sorry for, is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic fund." Ethan, who had just poured himself a scotch, froze. He attempted his usual arsenal of deflection and charm. "Liv, honey, you can't be naive about this," he said, forcing a condescending chuckle. "It's a vanity title. A guy like Thorne does that for the woman he's with. He sets her up with a fancy title and a corner office to keep her happy. It's a gilded cage, nothing more. It's meaningless." "Is it?" Olivia countered, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Because I read her thesis, Ethan. The one she wrote when she went back to school after you two divorced, the school she dropped out of 20 years ago to support you." She pushed the tablet across the table. "Read it. Tell me if the mind that produced that work is simple. Tell me if that woman is unambitious." He glanced at the title page and recoiled as if burned. He couldn't bring himself to read it. "This is ridiculous. You're letting this get to you. That life, that woman, it has nothing to do with us." "It has everything to do with us." Olivia's voice finally cracked with the weight of her fury and disappointment. "Our entire relationship, my entire understanding of you, is built on the story you told me about her, and it was all a lie. You didn't just lie to me, Ethan. You've been lying to yourself for years. You told me she was an anchor, that she was holding you back. But she wasn't, was she?" She stood up and began pacing, her movements sharp and agitated. "No, you were holding her back. You were so terrified that she might outshine you that you did everything in your power to convince her she couldn't. You clipped her wings, Ethan. You mocked her passions. You belittled her intelligence. You made her feel small so that you could feel big. That's not a marriage. That's psychological warfare. That's sabotage." His face, usually a mask of confident charm, began to crumble. "You don't understand," he stammered, his bravado failing him. "She had no confidence. I tried to help her. I tried to build her up." "No." Olivia spun on him, her eyes blazing. "You tried to keep her in a box you had built for her, and now you absolutely cannot stand that she found a way to break out of it and build a skyscraper of her own. You're not proud. You're not even angry. You're humiliated that the world can now see what you refuse to." His world was shrinking with terrifying speed. His calls to Liam now went straight to voicemail. Noah had simply unfollowed him on all social media. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. Desperate to regain control, to rewrite the ending of this disastrous chapter, he made a fatal error in judgment. He saw online that the Thorne-Walsh Foundation was hosting the opening of a new exhibition. Alara would be there. He would go. He would bump into her, be magnanimous and charming, the bigger person. He would show everyone, and most importantly himself, that he was unbothered, that her success was a quaint footnote he found amusing. It was a desperate last-ditch gamble by a man about to lose everything. The gallery was a different world, one of quiet power, old money, and new art. Ethan, in his slightly too shiny suit, felt a sheen of sweat on his brow. He felt like an intruder. He spotted her easily. She wasn't just in the room. She owned it. She was speaking with a white-haired museum director and a famous avant-garde artist, her gestures economical and confident, her laugh warm but authoritative. She radiated an energy that was both inspiring and intimidating. He hovered at the edge of the circle, waiting for his moment, a predator, stalking a creature that was no longer his prey. When the group dispersed, he moved in, plastering his most charming smile on his face. "Ella," he said, the old pet name, sounding alien and foolish in this sophisticated space. She turned. There was no shock, no anger, not even surprise in her eyes. There was only a faint, weary recognition, the look one gives an old, unpleasant memory that has briefly surfaced. "Ethan," she replied, her tone perfectly chillingly level. "Look at you," he said, gesturing vaguely at the priceless art on the walls. "This is quite something. I have to say, I'm so proud of what you've fallen into." It was the grenade he had chosen to roll at her feet, his last pathetic attempt to frame her success as dumb luck. Alara's polite expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened into chips of obsidian. She took a single deliberate step closer, invading his personal space and lowering her voice into a devastatingly calm indictment meant only for him. Fallen into, she repeated the words, precise and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "No, Ethan. I climbed. I climbed on my hands and knees out of the deep, dark hole you left me in. The hole you spent 10 years digging for me with your casual cruelty, your patronizing pats on the head, your condescension and your tiny, fragile ego that couldn't bear the thought of a woman who might be your equal." Ethan's smile evaporated. His face went numb. "You never saw me," she continued, her voice unwavering, "because you never actually looked. You were too busy looking at your own reflection in my eyes, and you demanded that reflection be small and admiring at all times. You told our friends I was afraid of success. The truth is, you were terrified of mine." She paused, letting the words sink into his marrow. He stood there speechless, stripped bare under the unforgiving gallery lights. He was no longer Ethan Vanderbilt, the successful VP. He was just Elara Walsh's insecure ex-husband. "The greatest gift you ever gave me was signing those divorce papers," she concluded, her professional poise returning in an instant. "You didn't set me free. You unshackled me from the dead weight of your insecurity." She gave him a final dismissive glance. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have board members to speak to. I have work to do." Without a second glance, she turned her back on him and walked away, rejoining a circle of influential people who greeted her with warmth and respect. Ethan was left standing alone in the middle of a crowded room, a void in the sea of mingling guests. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him even if there were none. He was a statue of his own failure, a monument to a collapsed empire of lies. Ethan walked out of the gallery and into the cool night air, but he couldn't seem to get a full breath. The city's vibrant symphony, the blare of horns, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren sounded muffled and far away, as if he were underwater. He stumbled through the streets in a daze. Elara's words echoing in his mind, each one a perfectly aimed stone, shattering the stained glass windows of his self-perception. "I climbed. Your tiny, fragile ego. You were too busy looking at your own reflection." He got into his car, a luxury sedan that suddenly felt like a cheap rental, and drove aimlessly. The glittering skyline of the city he had claimed to conquer now seemed to mock him, each light a reminder of a world he was no longer a part of. By the time he arrived back at the apartment, the sun was beginning to threaten the horizon, and he felt a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The true consequences of his public unraveling began the next day. He saw a missed call and a text from Liam. "We need to talk. Call me." Steeling himself, Ethan made the call, hoping he could smooth things over, deploy the charm that had always been his salvation. "Hey man, about last night," Ethan started, but Liam cut him off. "I wasn't there, Ethan, but Chloe was," Liam said, his voice flat and heavy, stripped of its usual warmth. "She told me everything. Not just the confrontation, but the look on your face, the things you said." He paused, and Ethan could hear him take a deep, weary breath. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About all the years I just nodded along. I remember Elara, Ethan. I remember her quizzing you for your MBA exams at our old poker nights, making flashcards for you. You used to call her your rock. Then somewhere along the line, she became an anchor in your stories. I never questioned it, and that's on me, but I'm questioning it now. Liam, it was complicated. You don't know the whole story. I know the story you told." Liam interrupted, his voice gaining a hard edge of conviction. "And it turns out that story was fiction, a fiction you needed to tell to make yourself the hero. I can't be friends with that man anymore, Ethan. I don't respect him." The line went dead, and with that click, a friendship of 2 decades was erased. Later, he saw a post from Noah on social media, a link to an article about narcissistic personalities with a simple cutting caption, "Some people build castles in the sky. Others build them on foundations of lies. Both are destined to collapse." It wasn't addressed to him, but it was aimed directly at his heart. The final, most devastating blow was waiting for him at home. He walked in to find 2 suitcases standing by the door like sentinels. Olivia was in the bedroom, not crying, but methodically emptying her drawers into a box. Her movements were calm, precise, and utterly final. "Liv, don't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I know I messed up. I was wrong. Okay, I'll admit it. I'll do anything." She stopped and turned to face him, her eyes filled not with hatred, but with a profound and unshakable sadness. "There's nothing to fix, Ethan. You can't fix a foundation that was never there. Our entire relationship, this whole life we were planning, it was a fantasy. It was your revenge story." "No, that's not true. I love you," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "Do you?" she asked, her voice genuinely curious. "Or do you love that I'm not her? Do you love that my family has a respectable name? That I didn't challenge your ego, that I was happy to play the supporting role of the real catch? The engagement ring on my finger," she said, twisting it off and placing it gently on the dresser. "It never felt like a promise to me. It felt like a trophy you'd won for successfully escaping your past." He flinched as if struck. "Olivia, that's cruel." "No, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Cruel is what you did to her, and what I'm doing now is saving myself from being your next victim." She looked him directly in the eye. "Let's play this forward. What happens in 5 years when I decide I want to go back to law school or start my own company? What happens when I have an opinion that differs from yours, or a success that has nothing to do with you? Does my ambition suddenly become a problem? Do I become your new anchor? Do you start telling your friends that I've changed and that I'm difficult? I won't let you write my story, Ethan." and I certainly won't let you edit me down to a footnote in yours." She picked up the box and walked past him toward the door. He made one last, desperate attempt. "So that's it. You're just throwing it all away because of her?" Olivia paused at the door and turned a look of final, sorrowful clarity on her face. "That's where you're still wrong. This has nothing to do with her. This is about you. The tragedy is that you had a real catch once. A true partner, a brilliant mind, a woman who by all accounts loved you unconditionally, and you were too blind, too insecure, and too small to see it. You didn't outgrow her, Ethan. You were never big enough for her in the first place." She walked out of the apartment and closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the vast, silent space. He was finally truly alone in his kingdom, but the walls were gone, and the throne was ashes. The weeks that followed were a long, slow descent into a grey, featureless existence. The vibrant, impeccably designed apartment became his prison. The silence was deafening. He lost his edge at work. His charisma, which had been fueled by a superiority complex he no longer possessed, sputtered and died. He made sloppy mistakes, his confidence shattered. One evening, staring blankly at his tablet, he saw a new article. It was a feature in a global business journal about the Thorne Walsh Foundation's groundbreaking new platform. The main photo was a candid shot of Alara on a video call with her global team. She was laughing, pointing to a complex chart on a screen, clearly in command, respected and admired by the faces looking back at her. The final scene of the article described her on the deck of the yacht as the sun set. Sebastian Thorne brought her not champagne, but a thick binder of documents and a mug of tea. "The Zurich team is in," he'd said, his voice a low murmur of pride. "They're following your lead completely. You were right about the market timing." He squeezed her shoulder, a gesture of profound equal partnership. Ethan stared at the image, at the woman he had tried so hard to erase, now more vivid and powerful than he could have ever imagined. The starter wife, the anchor. She was navigating the world while he was adrift in an empty apartment. She had found a partner who saw her brilliance as an asset, not a threat. She had climbed out of the hole he had dug, and from the summit, she wasn't looking back. She was looking at the new dawn, and her entire world was bathed in light. And there you have it. A story about how the truth, like a powerful current, can rise up and wash away even the most carefully built empire of lies. Ethan thought he was trading up, but he was really just trading away his own chance at genuine connection, blinded by his own insecurity. Ilara's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Sometimes, the worst endings are actually the most liberating beginnings. What did you think of Ethan's downfall? Were you cheering for Ilara? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your take on these real-life dramas. If you don't want to miss our next story, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. Thanks for listening.
The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like a death knell. For Isabel Croft, this glittering penthouse party wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Trapped in a circle of predatory smiles, she faced Bradley Vance, a man whose wealth was matched only by his cruelty. His voice, dripping with venom, was about to shatter her world in front of New York's elite. He raised his glass for a toast, a smirk playing on his lips, ready to expose her most humiliating secret. But just as he opened his mouth, a low, commanding voice cut through the tension. a voice that belonged to the city's most powerful and reclusive billionaire. A hand rested on her shoulder, and the world stopped. The air in Marcus Thorne's Fifth Avenue penthouse was thick with the scent of money and ambition. It smelled of imported lilies, expensive perfume, and the faint metallic tang of unspoken rivalries. For Isabel "Izzy" Croft it was suffocating. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress she'd bought from a consignment store, a ghost of some other woman's forgotten evening, she felt like a house sparrow that had accidentally flown into an aviary of exotic peacocks. Her job was simple: blend in. She was the plus one of her roommate Chloe, whose father was a junior partner at the law firm representing Thorne's tech empire. Chloe had insisted painting a picture of networking and opportunity. Izzy, a scholarship student juggling her architectural engineering degree at Columbia with a part-time waitressing job, knew better. These weren't her people. She clutched a glass of sparkling water, the condensation cold against her nervous fingers. From her vantage point near the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park was a vast, dark quilt stitched with the glittering thread of lamplight. It was a view worth more than she could ever hope to earn. Every person in this room was a predator or a prize, a player in a game whose rules were written in stock options and hereditary trusts. They moved with an easy, fluid grace she couldn't mimic, their laughter echoing with the confidence of those who had never known a day of true financial worry. Her eyes scanned the room, a nervous habit, and then she saw him. Bradley Vance. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in her stomach. He was standing with a small group of sycophants, holding a flute of champagne with the casual arrogance of a king in his court. He hadn't changed since their university days. The same perfectly coiffed sandy hair, the same expensive custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than her semester's tuition, and the same cruel curl to his lips. Their history was a short, ugly story. In her sophomore year, Bradley, then a senior, and a notorious campus predator from a wealthy real estate family, had cornered her at a university fundraiser. He'd been drunk aggressive and used to getting what he wanted. When she had firmly and publicly rejected his crude advances in front of his fraternity brothers. His pride had been wounded. He couldn't accept a no from a girl he considered beneath him, a scholarship case, as he'd loudly called her. His humiliation had festered, turning into a quiet, simmering hatred. He'd made it his mission to make her life difficult, spreading petty rumors and using his influence to have her shifts cut at her campus job. Seeing him here in his natural habitat felt like stumbling into a shark tank. Izzy tried to shrink back to become one with the velvet curtains, but it was too late. His eyes, the color of washed-out denim, met hers across the room. A slow, malicious smile spread across his face. It wasn't a greeting, it was a promise. He excused himself from his group and began to move toward her, not directly, but in a circling predatory path that was designed to build anticipation, to let her know she was his target. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Chloe was nowhere in sight, likely absorbed in a conversation with some aspiring tech bro. Izzy was alone. She could feel the eyes of others starting to follow Bradley's trajectory, sensing the impending drama. This was their entertainment. Well, well, well. Bradley's voice was a low purr as he finally stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne and the whiskey on his breath. Isabel Croft, I must say I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't realize Thorne Technologies was handing out pity invitations. Izzy lifted her chin, refusing to let him see her fear. Hello, Bradley. I'm here with a friend. A friend? He repeated, drawing out the word as if it were a foreign concept. He gestured vaguely at her dress. Let me guess. You're working the event? Taking coats, serving canapés. It would suit you? Each word was a carefully aimed dart designed to remind her of her place, to remind everyone else. A few people nearby had stopped their own conversations, their faces alight with cruel curiosity. I'm here as a guest, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Just like you. Bradley let out a short, humorless laugh. A guest? Oh, that's rich. Don't play games with me, Isabel. We both know what you are. You're a charity case who slipped through the cracks. You don't belong here." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was just loud enough for the growing circle of onlookers to hear. "How much did you have to pay your friend to bring you, or was it a different kind of payment?" The insinuation was vile, and it hung in the air like poison. Izzy felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up her neck. She wanted to throw her drink in his face to scream at him, but she knew that's what he wanted. He wanted a scene. He wanted to prove that she was trash, that she had no class, no composure. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "You're mistaken, Bradley, and you're making a fool of yourself." His eyes narrowed. Her defiance seemed to fuel his rage. "Am I? We'll see about that." He turned slightly, raising his voice to address their now rapt audience. "Everyone, a moment of your time, if I may." The general murmur of the party began to quieten. More heads turned their way. Izzy felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, pinning her like a specimen under a microscope. This was it, the public execution of her dignity. "I just wanted to introduce you all to someone." Bradley continued, his arm sweeping out to indicate Izzy. "This is Isabel Croft, a master of social climbing. You see, some people work their way into rooms like this. Others, well, they find more creative ways. Isabel here is a true artist of deception." Panic seized her. Her throat was tight, her palms sweating. She looked desperately for an exit, for any escape, but she was hemmed in by a wall of smirking, judgmental faces. She was utterly, completely alone. And in the corner of her eye she saw a tall, silent figure detach himself from the shadows near the balcony. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his presence exuding an aura of absolute power that made even Bradley Vance look like a petulant child. He was watching the scene with an unreadable expression, his dark eyes fixed on her. It was Damian Blackwood, the billionaire, the ghost, the man who owned half of this city and was rarely ever seen. And he was walking toward them. The name Damian Blackwood was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the circles Izzy now found herself in. He was a myth, a legend of modern finance. He'd built a global empire in private equity and tech investments before he was 30, operating with a savant-like foresight and a ruthless efficiency that terrified his competitors. He was notoriously private, a phantom who moved through the world's financial capitals without a digital footprint. There were maybe a dozen authenticated photos of him in existence. To see him here in the flesh was like spotting a snow leopard in Central Park. As he moved, a strange phenomenon occurred. The boisterous energy of the party seemed to warp around him, creating a pocket of silence. People didn't just make way for him. They seemed to recede as if a force field emanated from his very being. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, handsome in a way that was more intimidating than inviting. His dark hair was cut short, and his eyes, which Izzy could now see were a deep stormy gray, held a chilling stillness. He wasn't watching the spectacle with amusement like the others. He was observing it with the detached intensity of a predator assessing its territory. Izzy's mind raced. Why was he here? Why was he walking toward them? She had never seen him before except for one grainy photo in a Forbes article she'd read for a business ethics class. Bradley, high on his own power trip, seemed to be the only person in the room oblivious to the Titan approaching. His focus was entirely on Izzy, his victim. "You see," Bradley's voice dripped with condescending pity, "Isabel comes from, let's call it a humble background. Very humble. From a town in Ohio you've never heard of, with a mother who—" "That's enough, Bradley." Izzy's voice was a low, trembling whisper, but it was all she could manage. The thought of him dragging her mother, a kind woman who had worked 2 jobs her entire life to give Izzy a chance, into this cesspool of cruelty was unbearable. "Enough!" Bradley scoffed, his face twisting into a mask of theatrical disbelief. "Oh, I'm just getting started. I think these people deserve to know who they're sharing the air with. This is a woman who got into Columbia on a diversity scholarship who probably lied on her application." "That's a lie!" She shot back, her voice gaining a sharp edge of fury. "Is it?" he challenged, stepping even closer. I think it's important for people to be authentic, don't you? To not pretend to be something you're not. And you, my dear Isabel, are pretending. You're wearing a costume drinking water because you probably can't stomach real champagne and hoping some rich idiot will be fooled by your little act. He was painting a masterpiece of humiliation, and the onlookers were his canvas. Some looked away, a flicker of discomfort in their eyes, but most watched with unabashed fascination. It was a blood sport, and Izzy was the bait. She felt the tears welling hot and sharp, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. She met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with a defiant fire that seemed to surprise him. She was cornered, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. "I may not have been born with a silver spoon, Bradley," she said, her voice clear and ringing in the now silent room. "But at least I have a spine. At least I have integrity. Those are things your father's money could never buy you." A collective gasp went through the small crowd. It was a direct hit. Bradley's face for a split second lost its smugness, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. His family's new money status was a source of deep insecurity for him, a fact Izzy had forgotten until that moment. He had overplayed his hand and she had called his bluff. His face turned a blotchy red. The venom in his eyes intensified. He was done playing with her. He was going for the kill. Integrity. He spat the word like it was poison. "You want to talk about integrity? Let's talk about your father." "Oh, wait." He paused for dramatic effect, a cruel, triumphant smirk returning to his face. "You can't, because he's sitting in a federal prison for embezzlement, isn't he? Ran a Ponzi scheme that bilked retirees out of their life savings. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? How much of that stolen money paid for your first semester before he got caught?" The air was sucked out of Izzy's lungs. It was her deepest, most painful secret. A wound that had never healed. Her father's crime had destroyed their family, ruined their name, and left her and her mother with nothing but shame and debt. It was the reason she worked so hard, the reason she was so determined to build a life based on honesty and merit. And he had just ripped the wound open and poured salt in it for the entertainment of a room full of strangers. The world dissolved into a blur of spinning lights and leering faces. The whispers started sharp and cutting. A convict's daughter. I knew there was something off about her. How did she even get in here? This was it, the final killing blow. Bradley stood there, chest puffed out, basking in his victory. He had won. He had utterly and completely destroyed her, and it was in that precise moment of her absolute devastation, as a single tear finally escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek, that the silent figure who had been approaching finally arrived. Damian Blackwood came to a stop beside her. He didn't look at Bradley. He didn't look at the crowd. His stormy gray eyes were fixed solely on Izzy, and for a fleeting, impossible second she thought she saw a flicker of something other than cold indifference in their depths. He moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a pristine white silk handkerchief. With a tenderness that was shockingly incongruous with his powerful aura, he reached out and gently dabbed the tear from her cheek. The entire room held its breath. Then he turned his head slowly, his gaze finally falling upon the stunned Bradley Vance. His voice when he spoke was not loud, but it carried an unnerving weight, a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "I believe," Damian Blackwood said, his tone as cold and sharp as splintered ice, "that you were just speaking about my fiancée." Silence. Absolute deafening silence. If Damian Blackwood had announced he was a visitor from another planet, the effect could not have been more shocking. The word fiancé hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. It detonated in the stunned minds of everyone present, obliterating the narrative Bradley had so carefully constructed. Bradley's jaw, which had been set in a triumphant smirk, literally dropped open. His face cycled through a series of comical expressions, utter disbelief, confusion, panic, and finally a dawning horror. He looked from Damian's granite-like expression to Izzy's equally bewildered face, and back again, his mind visibly short-circuiting. Izzy felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. Fiancée. The word echoed in her head, nonsensical and bizarre. She stared at Damien Blackwood, this stranger who had just claimed her in the most public and definitive way possible. His hand was now resting lightly on the small of her back, a gesture of possession and protection that was both terrifying and in a strange way anchoring. It was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. The crowd began to react not with whispers but with a collective frantic recalibration. The looks of derision that had been aimed at Izzy a moment ago were instantly replaced with expressions of awe, envy, and frantic curiosity. She had been instantly transformed from a social pariah, the daughter of a convict, into the chosen partner of the most enigmatic and powerful man in the room, perhaps in the country. The whiplash was dizzying. Damien's gray eyes remained locked on Bradley, and they were utterly devoid of mercy. "You were saying something about her family," he prompted, his voice dangerously soft. "Please continue. I'm fascinated to hear your assessment." Bradley paled, his skin taking on a pasty, unwell quality under the warm party lighting. He was like a jackal that had been swaggering over its kill, only to look up and find a lion standing over him. He stammered, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. I... Mr. Blackwood, I had no idea. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Damien repeated the words flat and cold. "It sounded to me like a very clear, very public, and very pathetic attempt to humiliate a woman you thought was unprotected. An error in judgment, Mr. Vance. A significant one." Every word was a nail in Bradley's social coffin. To be publicly rebuked by Damien Blackwood was not just embarrassing. It was a potential career ender. Deals could evaporate, invitations could cease, doors could be slammed shut. The sycophants who had been laughing at his jokes moments before now took a subtle, coordinated step away from him as if he were contagious. Damien's gaze flickered over Bradley's expensive suit, his Patek Philippe watch, his look of entitled arrogance. "Let me offer you a piece of advice," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "The next time you feel the need to puff out your chest and assert your dominance, try doing it with someone who can fight back. Because what you've just done is the equivalent of trying to prove your strength by kicking a puppy. It doesn't make you look strong. It makes you look weak and frankly pathetic." He didn't raise his voice, but the contempt in his tone was so potent it was almost a physical blow. Bradley shrank under the weight of it, his face burning with a shame far deeper than any he had tried to inflict on Izzy. Without another glance at the defeated man, Damien turned his full attention back to Izzy. His expression softened almost imperceptibly, though his eyes remained intense. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice for her ears only. Izzy could only nod her throat too tight to form words. She was still reeling, caught in the eye of a hurricane he had created. Fiancée. The word kept screaming in her mind. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good." He then raised his voice slightly to address the room at large, which was still watching them with rapt attention. "My fiancée and I were just leaving. We have an early start tomorrow." It was a dismissal. He was ending the party for himself and by extension for everyone else. The host, Marcus Thorne, a tech billionaire who usually commanded rooms with his sheer presence, quickly bustled over his face a mask of concern and apology. "Damien, I am so sorry. I had no idea this was happening. Is everything all right?" Thorne asked pointedly, ignoring Bradley, who now looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Everything is fine, Marcus," Damien said smoothly, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. His hand never left Izzy's back, a constant firm pressure. "Isabel was just feeling a little overwhelmed by the enthusiasm of some of your guests. Thank you for the invitation." He guided Izzy through the crowd, which parted for them like the Red Sea. The whispers followed them, a shocked, excited buzz. "Damien Blackwood's fiancée." "Who is she?" "I can't believe it." Did you see Bradley Vance's face? Izzy walked in a daze, her legs moving on autopilot. She was aware of the stares, the reevaluations, the sudden desperate attempts by people to catch her eye and offer a smile as if to retroactively align themselves with her newfound status. It was sickening. They were the same people who had been ready to watch her be torn apart moments earlier. As they reached the private elevator, Damien pressed the button. The polished brass doors slid open with a soft hiss. He guided her inside, and as the doors began to close, sealing them off from the prying eyes and the cacophony of the party, Izzy finally found her voice. The doors shut with a quiet thud, encasing them in a small, silent, mirrored box. It was just the two of them. She turned to face him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The shock was finally wearing off, replaced by a tidal wave of confusion and a healthy dose of fear. What was that? She managed to ask, her voice trembling. Why did you do that? Why did you call me your fiancé? Damien Blackwood looked down at her, his stormy gray eyes unreadable. There was no warmth in them, no hint of a savior's kindness. There was only a cool, calculating intelligence. Because, he said, his voice calm and level, it was the most efficient way to solve both of our problems. His, yours, and mine. The elevator descended in unnerving silence. Izzy stared at Damien Blackwood, her mind struggling to process his last statement. Solve both of our problems. What problems could this man possibly have that involved her? The mirrored walls of the elevator reflected them back, a towering, imposing figure in a flawless suit, and a bewildered young woman in a second-hand dress looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a Rolls-Royce. The doors opened into a private subterranean garage, a stark contrast to the opulence of the penthouse. The air was cool and smelled of concrete and expensive leather. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce Cullinan was parked directly in front of them, a chauffeur in a dark suit standing patiently by the rear door. He nodded respectfully at Damien but showed no surprise at the sight of Izzy. We need to talk, Damien said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Somewhere private. My car. He gestured toward the vehicle. Izzy hesitated for a fraction of a second. Her every instinct screamed at her to run, to thank him for his intervention, and disappear back into her anonymous life. But another part of her, the part that was still reeling from the public evisceration she had just endured, knew she couldn't just walk away. He had irrevocably tied her to him with a single word. She needed answers. She gave a stiff nod and allowed him to guide her toward the car. The chauffeur opened the door and she slid onto the plush, cream-colored leather seat. The interior was like a private jet, silent and insulated from the outside world. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud, sealing them inside. Damien got in the other side and the car pulled away with a silent electric hum. Where are you taking me? Izzy asked, her voice betraying her anxiety. My city residence. It's the most secure place for this conversation, he replied, not looking at her. He was staring out the tinted window at the blurred lights of Manhattan. I apologize for the lack of a proper introduction. My name is Damien Blackwood. I know who you are, she said quietly. Everyone knows who you are. I'm Isabel Croft. I know, he said, and the simple statement sent a chill down her spine. He turned his head to look at her, his gaze direct and unnervingly perceptive. Columbia University, architectural engineering, full academic scholarship, valedictorian of your high school in Northwood, Ohio. Your mother is a nurse named Sarah. Your father is Robert Croft. Izzy flinched as if he had struck her. How do you know all that? It's my business to know things, he said simply. Information is the most valuable currency in the world. I had my head of security do a full background check on every guest at Thorne's party, a standard precaution. You did a background check on me, she asked, a fresh wave of violation washing over her. On everyone, he clarified, a hint of impatience in his voice. Your file was more interesting than most. It denotes a high level of intelligence resilience and a distinct lack of powerful connections, which makes you a low-risk variable. You also have a compelling reason to need a significant amount of money very quickly. Izzy stared at him bewildered. Money? What are you talking about? Your mother, she was diagnosed with a rare form of early-onset rheumatoid arthritis 6 months ago. The experimental treatments aren't covered by her insurance. The bills are mounting. You've taken on a second job bartending on weekends to try and help, but you're falling behind. Am I wrong? The clinical, dispassionate way he laid out the most painful and private details of her life was staggering. She felt exposed, stripped bare. Why are you doing this? The Rolls-Royce glided to a stop in another private underground garage, this one beneath a sleek modern skyscraper in Tribeca. They took another private elevator, this one opening directly into a breathtaking penthouse apartment. It was a study in minimalist luxury dark wood floors, vast expanses of glass, and exquisitely chosen pieces of modern art. It was less a home and more a corporate headquarters for a single human being. Damien walked over to a wet bar and poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to her. Please sit. Izzy perched on the edge of a large gray sofa that probably cost more than her car back home. She watched as Damien stood by the window, a dark silhouette against the glittering cityscape. Tonight at that party, he began turning to face her. You had a problem. Bradley Vance was about to destroy your reputation and subject you to unbearable public humiliation. I also had a problem. I am in the final stages of a $10 billion merger with Tanaka Holdings, a very powerful, very conservative Japanese conglomerate. The chairman, Kenji Tanaka, is an old-fashioned man. He believes stability in one's personal life reflects stability in business. He will only close the deal with a man he perceives to be a family man. He finds my bachelor status unsettling. He paused, letting the information sink in. Izzy's mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. Mr. Tanaka is arriving in New York in 2 days for the final signing, Damien continued. I have been exaggerating the seriousness of my romantic life for the past few months. I told him I was engaged. He has now expressed a deep desire to meet my fiancée. Izzy's eyes widened in dawning comprehension. No, she breathed. You can't be serious. I am perfectly serious, he said, his face impassive. I needed a fiancé, immediately. Someone believable, intelligent, presentable, and with no connections that could complicate the situation. Someone who would not be starstruck and who could handle pressure. And someone with a strong motivation to agree to an unconventional proposal. When I saw Vance cornering you, I saw an opportunity. A convergence of interests. By intervening, I solved your immediate problem and created a potential solution for my own. So you just decided, she asked, incredulous. You decided to announce to a room full of the most influential people in New York that a complete stranger was your fiancé? It was a calculated risk, he admitted. But watching you stand up to Vance, seeing your defiance even when you were cornered, confirmed my initial assessment. You have steel. You wouldn't break. Izzy stood up, pacing the floor. Her head was spinning. This is insane. This is completely and utterly insane. Is it? He countered, his voice calm and logical. Let's be practical, Ms. Croft. I am offering you a business proposition. A contract. For the next 2 months, you will play the part of my adoring fiancé. You will attend a handful of dinners and events culminating in the signing of the Tanaka deal. You will be convincing, poised, and you will follow my lead at all times. And in return, she asked, almost afraid of the answer. In return, he said, walking over to a sleek mahogany desk, I will pay you $5 million. Izzy stopped dead. The number seemed to hang in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. $5 million. It was an astronomical, life-altering sum of money. It was her mother's medical bills paid in full. It was a future free from the crushing weight of debt. It was freedom. He saw the conflict in her eyes. In addition, he added, I will ensure that Bradley Vance and his family's real estate company become entangled in so many regulatory investigations and zoning disputes that he will be too busy to ever bother you or anyone else again. I will erase him as a problem. The offer was diabolical, and it was perfect. He was offering her not just a fortune, but security and revenge. He had found her exact price. There will be rules. He continued, his tone all business. 1. We will maintain the illusion of a devoted couple in public at all times. This is non-negotiable. 2. This is a business arrangement. There will be no emotional or physical entanglement beyond what is necessary for the performance. 3. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement so ironclad that if you so much as whisper my name to a stranger after this is over, you will forfeit the money and face legal consequences that will last you a lifetime. He slid a thick leather-bound folder across the desk. The contract is all there. My lawyers drafted it this evening while we were driving here. It includes the payment schedule, the terms of the NDA, and a cover story for our relationship that you will need to memorize. Izzy stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. This was a deal with the devil, a devil dressed in a Tom Ford suit. She would be trading her integrity, her identity, for financial salvation. She would be living a lie, becoming the very thing Bradley Vance had accused her of being, a pretender, an actress. But then she thought of her mother's pained smile, the worry in her eyes she tried so hard to hide. She thought of the mountain of bills on her small kitchen table. She thought of the humiliation she had felt under Bradley's cruel gaze. Damian Blackwood had offered her a cage, but it was a gilded one, and from inside it she could solve all the problems that haunted her in the real world. With a trembling hand she reached out and picked up the folder. Where do I sign? The next 48 hours were a whirlwind, a complete re-engineering of Isabel Croft's existence. She was moved from her cramped shared apartment in Morningside Heights into a lavish guest suite in Damian's penthouse that was larger than her entire floor. Her wardrobe, once a collection of thrift store finds and fast fashion staples, was replaced by an army of stylists who descended upon her with racks of designer clothes from Chanel, Dior, and Valentino. She was given lessons in etiquette, wine tasting, and the art of deflecting intrusive questions from the press, which had already begun a frenzied campaign to uncover the identity of the Blackwood mystery woman. Damian was a demanding and meticulous director. They spent hours memorizing their cover story. They had supposedly met 6 months ago at a charity auction for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she had impressed him with her knowledge of postmodern architecture. He had pursued her relentlessly, won over by her intellect and spirit. It was a plausible, if somewhat cliché, romance. They rehearsed anecdotes, inside jokes, and significant dates. It felt like studying for the most important exam of her life. I supposedly bought you a first edition of Vitruvius's De Architectura for our 2-month anniversary. He quizzed her one afternoon, not looking up from his tablet. They were in his vast minimalist living room, the city skyline their backdrop. It was a 1567 edition with the Daniele Barbero woodcut illustrations, she answered automatically. You found it at a private Sotheby's auction in London. You said it reminded you of the foundational principles of beauty and strength, which is what you saw in me. She recited the line with a practiced emptiness that made her skin crawl. Good, he said with a curt nod. Your favorite restaurant is a small, family-owned Italian place in the West Village called Il Posto. We go there when we want to be normal. My favorite thing about you is your passion for your work. Your favorite thing about me is my decisiveness. He made it sound like a corporate merger, not a love story. Throughout it all, he remained distant professional and infuriatingly unreadable. There were moments, however, when the mask slipped. During a dress fitting for their first public appearance, a gala at the Museum of Modern Art, She emerged in an emerald green silk gown that clung to her curves. For a split second, as his eyes swept over her, his cool composure faltered. His gaze lingered, and a flicker of something raw and appreciative ignited in the depths of his gray eyes before he quickly extinguished it. "The color is suitable," was all he said, turning back to his work. Their first test was the MoMA Gala. As they stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, they were met with a blinding barrage of flashbulbs. The press swarmed them, shouting questions. "Mr. Blackwood, who is she? Isabel, where did you meet? Is the engagement real?" Damien's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through her own. The touch was electric, a jolt of unexpected warmth. "Smile," he murmured, his voice low and close to her ear. "They need to believe you're the happiest woman in the world." She lifted her head, put on the performance of her life, and smiled. Inside, she felt like a fraud. But as they walked the red carpet, Damien's hand a steady, possessive weight in hers, a strange thing happened. The role began to feel less like a costume. The way he looked at her for the cameras with a manufactured adoration that was shockingly convincing made her own heart beat a little faster. He would lean in to whisper something in her ear, and while it was usually a dry instruction like, "Angle your body 45 degrees toward the Reuters camera," the effect on the audience was one of intimate conspiracy. Inside, they were the center of gravity. Everyone wanted a moment with them. Izzy found herself in conversation with senators, artists, and CEOs. She spoke about her architectural studies with a genuine passion that seemed to surprise them, and Damien would watch her, a look of quiet pride on his face that felt dangerously real. The main event, however, was the dinner with Kenji Tanaka. It was held at a private Michelin-starred restaurant that Damien had booked out entirely. Mr. Tanaka was a small, immaculate man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He was accompanied by his wife, Aiko, a graceful woman who smiled warmly at Izzy. "So," Mr. Tanaka said after the initial pleasantries, his English precise and formal, "Blackwood-san, you are a man of many secrets, but this is the most beautiful one you have kept." Damien smiled, a rare, genuine-looking smile that reached his eyes. He placed his hand over Izzy's on the table. "She is my foundation, Tanaka-san, my anchor." Izzy's breath hitched. The lie was so smooth, so perfect. Throughout the dinner, Mr. Tanaka observed them closely. He asked Izzy about her family. Sticking to the script, she spoke lovingly of her mother, the nurse, and vaguely of her father, who had passed away, a lie Damien had insisted upon for simplicity. Every mention of her fabricated life felt like a small betrayal of her real one. Aiko Tanaka turned to her, her expression kind. "It must be difficult to keep up with a man like Damien-san," she said softly. "He is so very focused." Izzy looked across the table at Damien, who was engaged in a quiet, intense discussion with Mr. Tanaka about market projections. She saw the weight he carried, the relentless drive in his eyes. "He is," she agreed, finding an unexpected kernel of truth. "But his focus is part of who he is, and I wouldn't want him to be anyone else." The words came out before she could stop them, and they felt more real than anything else she had said all night. Damien's head turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers for a brief, charged moment. He had heard her. Later in the evening, as the men discussed the final points of the deal, Aiko took Izzy aside. "He looks at you," she said with a knowing smile, "when you are not looking. He watches you. A man who is pretending does not do that. He is very lucky to have found you, Croft-san." Izzy's heart fluttered with a confusing mix of guilt and something else. Something warm and unfamiliar. Was it possible? Could there be more to his performance than just a contract? Her resolve was tested when they returned to the penthouse. As soon as the elevator doors closed, the act dropped. He released her hand, and the distance between them returned instantly. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice back to its usual business-like tone. "Tanaka is pleased. He sees you as a stabilizing influence." "I'm a good actress, I guess," she replied, a bitter taste in her mouth. "Yes," he said, turning away to loosen his tie. "You are." The praise felt hollow. She hated this. The pretense, the lies, the way she was beginning to wish the act was real. But the biggest challenge was yet to come. Lurking in the shadows of their carefully constructed world was Bradley Vance and his new girlfriend, a sharp-tongued socialite named Veronica Sterling. Bradley had been publicly humiliated, and a man like him would not let that go. He was quiet for now, but Izzy knew he was digging, searching for a crack in the facade. And she knew that if he found one, he would not hesitate to blow their entire world apart. Life as Damien Blackwood's fiancée was a series of meticulously staged moments. There were charity auctions where they smiled for the cameras, private dinners with board members where she played the part of the charming and intelligent partner, and quiet, candid moments, carefully orchestrated for the paparazzi, a stroll through Central Park, a shared coffee at an outdoor cafe. With each passing day, the lines between Izzy the actress and Izzy the person began to blur. She discovered surprising things about Damien in their stolen offstage moments. She learned he had a dry, almost undetectable sense of humor. She found he was a brilliant chess player and would sometimes sit for hours staring at a board, playing out entire games in his head. She learned he had a younger sister who had died of leukemia when he was a teenager, and that the multi-million-dollar pediatric cancer wing he'd anonymously funded at Mount Sinai Hospital was named after her. He never spoke of these things directly, but she pieced them together from conversations she overheard and documents she saw on his desk. The cold, calculating billionaire was a construct, a suit of armor protecting something far more complex underneath. One evening she was in the penthouse's library working on a blueprint for her final university project when he came in. He didn't speak, just watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" he finally asked, gesturing to the complex schematics. "It's a design for a sustainable mixed-use community center for low-income neighborhoods." She explained her passion for the project, making her forget their strange arrangement. "It uses passive solar design, rainwater harvesting, and modular construction to keep costs down without sacrificing aesthetic quality or function." She expected him to be dismissive, to see it as a naive, idealistic student project. Instead, he leaned over the table, his eyes tracing the lines she had drawn. His questions were sharp and insightful, pointing out potential structural weaknesses and offering suggestions on material sourcing that she hadn't considered. For nearly an hour, they weren't a fake couple. They were two intellects meeting, discussing a shared interest in structure and design. In that moment, the $5 million contract and the lies that bound them seemed to dissolve. There was just the quiet hum of mutual respect. "It's brilliant," he said at last, his voice a low murmur. He was standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. His gaze lifted from the blueprints to her face, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. The space between them crackled with an unspoken energy. He leaned in slightly, and for a heart-stopping second she thought he was going to kiss her. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He straightened up, the professional mask snapping back into place. "It's my head of security," he said, his tone once again cool and distant. "There's a problem." The problem, it turned out, was Bradley Vance. As Izzy had feared, he had not been idle. Humiliated and vengeful, he had hired a ruthless private investigator to dig into every corner of her life. He couldn't attack Damien directly, but he could destroy Damien's new fiancée. "He's found something," Damien said, his back to her as he spoke on the phone. "He's planning to make his move tonight." Tonight was the annual conservatory ball, one of the most high-profile events of the New York social season. It was also their final public appearance before the Tanaka deal was signed the following day. It was the perfect stage for Bradley's revenge. "What did he find?" Izzy asked, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. Damien turned to face her, his expression grim. "He found your father, Isabel. Not just that he's in prison. He found a specific victim of his Ponzi scheme, an elderly woman, a widow who lost everything. Her name is Eleanor Vance." Izzy stared at him, uncomprehending. Vance. She's Bradley's great aunt. Damien finished the pieces clicking into place. Bradley is going to paint a picture of you as a predator, the daughter of a con man seducing me for my money while your family is responsible for ruining his. It's a powerful, vicious narrative, and he plans to announce it during his toast tonight. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Bradley wasn't just exposing her father. He was twisting the story to make himself the victim, to make her the villain. "We can't go," Izzy said, panic rising in her voice. "We have to cancel." "No," Damien said, his voice firm as steel. "We do not run. We do not hide. That would be an admission of guilt. It would kill the Tanaka deal and confirm every lie Bradley tells. We are going, and we are going to face him." "How?" she cried, her composure finally cracking. "He's going to destroy me, Damien, and he'll take you down with me." He walked over to her, stopping directly in front of her. He reached out and took her hands, his grip strong and steady. "He is not going to destroy you," he said, his stormy eyes boring into hers. "Because his information is incomplete. My team has been busy as well. Trust me, Isabel." His use of her name, the sincerity in his voice, the warmth of his hands, it was all she had to cling to. She nodded, putting her faith in the man who had bought her, the man who had created this gilded cage. When they arrived at the ball, the atmosphere was electric with tension. News of the impending drama had clearly leaked. People were whispering behind their hands, casting furtive glances their way. Bradley Vance was holding court near the main stage, a triumphant smirk on his face. Beside him, Veronica Sterling looked like a cat that had cornered a canary. They took their seats at the head table. Izzy felt cold, exposed. The evening dragged on a slow-motion nightmare. Finally, the time for the toasts arrived. The host introduced Bradley Vance, a major donor, to say a few words. Bradley took the stage, a champagne flute in his hand. He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on Izzy with malevolent glee. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Tonight we are here to celebrate beauty, art, and community. But I feel it's also a time for truth. We have in our midst a story of incredible ambition." He let the word hang in the air. "We all were so surprised when the great Damien Blackwood announced his engagement. And we were all so curious about his chosen bride, the lovely Isabel Croft." He smiled a shark smile. "I did a little digging, as I felt it was my civic duty, and I discovered a connection between our families. You see, Ms. Croft's father, Robert Croft, a convicted felon, was responsible for financially ruining a member of my family, my dear great-aunt Eleanor." A wave of shocked gasps rippled through the room. It was even worse than she had imagined. "So you see," Bradley concluded, raising his glass, "this isn't a fairy tale. It's a tragedy, or perhaps a brilliantly executed heist. A toast, then, to Isabel Croft. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." He drank, and the room was silent, all eyes on her. It was the moment of her execution. She felt Damien's hand on her thigh under the table, a silent command to stay seated, to stay calm. Then Damien stood up. He didn't look angry. He looked utterly serene. He picked up his own glass. "Thank you, Bradley," he said, his amplified voice cutting through the tension. "Thank you for bringing that up. It's a story Isabel and I have been wanting to share." Bradley's triumphant accusation hung in the air, but Damien rose with unnerving calm. He confirmed the story of Izzy's father shocking the silent ballroom. But then he masterfully turned the tables. He revealed Izzy's deepest secret. For years, she had been anonymously donating over half her income into a restitution fund, personally paying back the victims of her father's crimes. The very first recipient, he announced to the stunned crowd, was Bradley's own great-aunt. Damien explained that this quiet act of integrity was how he had truly found her and fallen in love. He painted a portrait not of a con artist, but of the most honorable woman he had ever known. He toasted her as the future Mrs. Blackwood, and the room erupted into thunderous applause. Bradley, utterly defeated and humiliated by the truth, vanished from the stage. The victory was absolute. Mr. All-Through. Tanaka, deeply impressed by Izzy's character and Damien's fierce loyalty, immediately confirmed their $10 billion deal. Later in the quiet of the penthouse, the performance was over. "The contract is complete," Damien said, his back to her. "You are free to go." "Was any of it real?" Izzy whispered, her heart breaking. "What you said tonight." He turned, his carefully constructed armor finally falling away. "The contract was a lie," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "But my feelings for you became the truest thing in my life. The terror I felt at the thought of you leaving, that is very real." He closed the distance between them, his gaze intense. "I'm proposing a new contract, a permanent merger, for life." He kissed her, a deep, desperate confession of everything he couldn't say. It wasn't an act, it was a beginning. Through her tears of joy, Izzy found her answer. She would sign. From a moment of planned public disgrace to a lifetime of unexpected love. Isabel's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest points can often lead to our greatest triumphs. She was targeted for her past, but it was her character, her hidden integrity, that ultimately defined her future. Damien Blackwood may have started with a cold, calculated business proposal, but he ended up making the investment of a lifetime in a partnership built not on lies, but on a truth he discovered along the way. Their journey shows that sometimes the most unbreakable contracts are the ones written on the heart. What do you think? Was Damien right to create such an elaborate lie, even for a good reason? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Isabel's incredible story of resilience and love, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life stories. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.